Okay, we had another question come in on chiropractic coding for ICD-10, and it says, I'm a recent receptionist of my coding certification in July, and recipient, excuse me. I said that doesn't make any sense. I'm a recent recipient of my coding certification. She got it in July, and I've recently begun working for a chiropractic office. I was hoping there would be some insight on whether the ICD-10 codes will still be the same for these areas. Has anyone heard anything? Thanks. Now, in the past, there was a little there were some specific codes for chiropractors, and it's actually changed that now they're the same. It's all integrated in the same. So what I went in and did was I found a fantastic website for common chiropractic codes, went in and looked at them, and it was long. It was really long, and I don't know if I've got that link there. But if you Google common chiropractic codes, that will come up. Thought maybe I saved the website, but I didn't. And I pulled out some of the ones that was on this list. It was all divided up. And in fact, Cheryl I see that in the questions, she has got it there. It's in www.chiro.org, and then there's some other things, but fantastic website with common codes. So I pulled some of the ones that I thought would be common, you know, and then I coded them in ICD-9, and then I coded them in ICD-10. So let's look at a few of those so you can get kind of an idea of how the codes are set up. The more you're exposed to ICD-10, the easier it feels. So the first one, migraines without aura. This is the way it reads in ICD-9, 346.10, without mention of intractable migraine, without mention of status migrainosus. And then in ICD-10, it's going to be G, 43.009, and this would also be migraine without aura, not otherwise specified. The wording is just about the same. But you'll notice with your ICD-10 code, it starts with a letter, and you have 2 characters before the decimal, and then you can have multiple characters after that. And the great thing about ICD-10 is you'll not run out of numbers, or spaces, because you can just keep going and going and going. And then sometimes you'll see a letter at the end, an A or an S. Okay, so another one, 739.0, non-allopathic lesion, head region, M99.00, segmental and somatic dysfunction of head region. See how the wording's a little bit different? 719.51, stiffness of joint, not elsewhere classified, shoulder region. Okay, then in ICD-10 we have M25.619, stiffness of unspecified shoulder, not elsewhere classified. Now, what's interesting about this, in ICD-9, you can't tell whether it's left or right shoulder. You'd have to put a modifier on there. With ICD-10, this is unspecified shoulder because they didn't tell, we were using this code here, but it actually would say left shoulder, right shoulder, bilateral, or unspecified. And just like in ICD-9, you have unspecified codes, and they often end in the number 9.
What does the G mean while you're, there was a question that just came in?
The G?
Yeah. What do the letters at the beginning mean?
The letters go alphabetically. They divided the systems up, and they actually start with A. I think they start, now that I think about that, I better go look. But they go alphabetical, and sometimes they line up, and sometimes they don't. So, meaning OB codes start with an O. Isn't that interesting? The codes that are doing muscle or the musculoskeletal system and stuff, it starts with an M. Cancer codes start with a C. Now, it doesn't always line up like that.
How about B?
But, what?
How about B?
B is, let me look real quick. I got my ICD-9. But B is, tends to be, let's see, infectious and parasitic diseases. So, you know what? The chapters didn't really change. Did you think that was funny, Boyd?
It had nothing to do with B.
Oh, because think bacteria. See, somebody already said that. See, B for bacteria. You can come up with a reason. I think we did this in a previous webinar where we kind of talked about how they divided it up. The chapters are the same. That, you know, instead of them being like 5,000 series or whatever, they just give them a letter instead of starting with a number. Yeah, so it's not that hard. It's actually kind of fun the way they divided it up. Let's see. How about bone and joint disorders, back, mother, complicating pregnancy, childbirth, unspecified episode of care. That's 648.70. Because you go to the chiropractor for that. There's a lot of pregnant women that go for chiropractor treatment when they're pregnant because of that low back pain. And looky there, starts with the letter O, and 33.0, maternal care for disproportion due to deformity of maternal pelvic bones. This code, 648.70, translated on the translator into O33.0. Now, look how difficult this is, though. And I think I had mentioned in a previous webinar, whenever you have a 0, you want to strike through that, you know, because it's not easy to see that this is a letter O and that's a number 0. So wherever you see zeros, it's just good to get into the habit of doing a strike through on zeros, and I do them on 7s as well, because a 7 can sometimes look like a 1 when people are writing. How about this one? This is one I know that people go to the chiropractor often for, unequal leg length, because you know you see them sit down on that bed and they kind of fiddle with your legs and then they pull, and sure enough, it never fails. One leg is longer than the other. 736.81, but ICD-10 is much more specific, not just right and left, but here what they've done, M21.759, unequal limb length acquired unspecified femur. And then you have it here for the tibia and fibia. So they're saying that it's because of the femur, and this one's the tibia fibia. They can be so specific. It's fantastic. And this all has to do with that laterality, one of the words that I know I mentioned in a previous webinar, laterality, meaning left and right. There's now codes for it. You don't have to use the modifiers to distinguish. So almost everything that it can be a right and a left will have a code, but it will say right, a code for right, a code for left, a code for bilateral, and a code for unspecified. And you want to stay away from unspecifieds. There's talk that the insurance companies aren't going to pay unspecifieds, but and the doctors do pretty good about, you know, telling right from left. But if they don't, now you've got a code that you can still use. Anyway, the thought is the chiropractic codes are going to be integrated, and they're the same diagnosis codes that you would use in ICD-10 that were used in ICD-9.
Get more CPC exam tips, coding certification training, and CEU credits. Go to www.codingcertification.org.